Welcome to the 2020 Evergreen Cemetery Lantern Tours, presented by the Pine Plains Free Library and the Little Nine Partners Historical Society. Due to extraordinary circumstances we find ourselves in this year, we're making this video presentation available to people who are unable to attend our live performance. We feel it's important to celebrate the people and history of Pine Plains, and we hope you enjoy this journey through time. During this show, you'll meet 5 individuals who inhabit Evergreen Cemetery. They will be seen at their grave sites and in locations where they lived or worked in their lifetimes, which are still in Pine Plains today. We invite you to sit back and enjoy the show, and please consider making a donation to the Pine Plains Free Library to help support future programming for the Pine Plains community. Let's meet our first character, Jacob Bowman, who owned a drugstore in Pine Plains for many years. In 1895, at the age of 52, he built an opera house, where the Pine Plains Pharmacy is today. Imagine the year is now 1902. We find Jacob promoting his opera house to passers-by.
Welcome to Bowman Opera House. I am Jacob Stahl Bowman, and tonight we are offering a splendid musical and dramatic entertainment. We'll begin with the showing of a moving picture and several musical selections performed by Lasher's Orchestra, including a song or two, to be followed by the play Who's to Win Him, in which a young Army officer in search of a wife is introduced to several prospective young ladies, with comedic results ensuing. Admission is only 25 cents. Children under 12 are 15 cents. Tickets are for sale right down the street at Bowman's Pharmacy. For those of you who are new here, perhaps you would like to linger for a moment while I tell you about the Opera House. Bringing an opera house to Pine Plains had long been a dream of mine. It all started when the railroad put Pine Plains on the map. Now people such as yourself could come from miles around for a day trip to enjoy our beautiful natural resources and the fresh air. Tourists even came up from New York City and spent all summer. But there was little to entertain them in the evening, and that's when I saw an opportunity. I would build an opera house. There is a saying that I heard somewhere, if you build it, they will come. Well, I had the situation in reverse. The people were already here, but I had no place to build the opera house. Ideally, something like this should be located in the center of town. And the perfect location was here at the corner of Church and Main Street, at the time the site of an old building that had fallen into disrepair. But the property was not for sale. This strip of land was owned by the descendants of George Clark, one of the original partners in the Little Nine Partners patent dating all the way back to the 1700s. Now, the Clark heirs made their money by leasing the land as opposed to selling it. They could have leased the land, of course. Stissing House across the street is on leased land, but I wanted a piece of property that I could own for my opera house. Then the current heir to the Clark holdings went bankrupt. Now, I am not one to usually rejoice at the misfortune of others, but I don't mind saying that most of Pine Plains, myself included, greeted this news with enthusiasm. In 1895, the Clark land in Pine Plains was subdivided and sold at auction from the steps of the Stissing National Bank, an event that was even written up in the New York Times. And I finally bought the property that I wanted. I set to work right away. The old building on the corner was torn down, and I erected the lovely building seen here today. The opera house is upstairs while I rent the downstairs to various businesses. You would be amazed to see what fits into that space. The Pine Plains Herald print shop, a dentist's office, Sadler's meat market, the town clerk's office, and Kupperman's clothiers. No detail was too small for my opera house, from its handsome interior to the excellent lighting. Patrons gain access through their own side entrance and ascend a staircase to the second floor, where they are greeted by a stage that is 20 by 16 feet, with a drop curtain featuring a lovely scene of Stissing Lake with Stissing Mountain in the background. The stage scenery, which is suitable for any play, was hand-painted by local artist Edward F. Wilbur and is considered unequaled in the area and not surpassed in many of the large cities. Our seating capacity is nearly 500, and the seats are exceedingly comfortable. A magnificent new piano completes the performance venue. Now, I promised the people of Pine Plains that I would have none but good entertainment therein. And many of our performances have been benefits for local organizations. We've had everything: dances, masquerade balls, plays, concerts, musicals, operettas, traveling vaudeville acts, minstrel shows, harvest festivals, and even the new moving pictures. The Black community's Young Men's Club have their cakewalks here. We've also made the space available to the community for temperance meetings, dance classes, commencement exercises, and lectures. So as you can see, this is more than just an opera house. So why not get your tickets for tonight's performance? I'm headed to the pharmacy right now, so you can just follow me. Maybe while you're there, you'll find something else that you like. I have my own brand of cough syrup. It's highly recommended. Only 25 cents a bottle.
We continue our journey through history and come upon Paulie Husted, having her portrait painted by Ami Phillips, a self-taught folk artist who traveled to small towns all over New England and parts of New York in the early 19th century, painting portraits of community leaders. She and her husband and children resided in the hamlet of Hammertown.
Oh dear, you've come at a bad time. I'm having my portrait painted by the esteemed Mr. Ami Phillips. Well, now that you're here, why don't you make yourself comfortable, and I'll tell you my story. I am Paulie Husted. My father was Isaac Smith Esquire, prominent farmer in these parts over 250 years ago. My parents moved to this area from what is now Greenwich, Connecticut, as part of a large westward migration before the Revolution. They settled near Buttermilk Pond in the southern part of what is Pine Plains today. Only then it wasn't even a town yet. It was Northeast Precinct. About 20 years before we came here, there was a Native American village nearby called Chicomico, where Moravians had established a mission. However, by the time we arrived in 1765, they had all gone, and there was hardly a trace left. Living on a farm on the edge of the wilderness, we had to be on constant guard against predators. While we didn't have coyotes back then, we had wolves, a larger, more dangerous animal. There were so many, in fact, that the town put a bounty of 6 pounds upon a wolf's head. This would be almost $1,000 today. Dairy farms were not common here in Dutchess County. We grew wheat like most Dutchess County farmers. Our neighbors were few and far between. But everyone came together to help with the harvest in early August. After the harvest, the wheat was carted 4 miles away to the nearest mill on the Amenia Road, which is hardly more than a rutted pathway. I had an older sister and 5 younger brothers. We all had daily chores. Because I was a girl, I had to help our mother to cook, do laundry, and keep house, and learn needlework, while my brothers got to hunt for game in the nearby woods. In rural areas like ours, most schooling was done at home, but our mother always found time in her busy day to teach us to read and write. Father served during the War for Independence as a surgeon's mate. This would be like a physician's assistant today. While he fought for freedom from the tyranny of England, He didn't believe in the right of all men to be free. I am ashamed to admit it, but Father was a slaveholder. And in 1782, he posted a notice for a runaway slave named Peter, who was about 20 years old. These notices were not uncommon, as slavery was still legal in New York until 1827. My father offered a $10 reward for Peter's capture. Months later, Peter was seen in Massachusetts, but I don't know what became of him after that. I married Peter Husted, a French Huguenot and prominent member of the community. We prospered. Peter owned a large tract of land in the Pine Plains hamlet, which would eventually provide the land for the Union Meeting House, which is now the Presbyterian Church, the Methodist Church, and Evergreen Cemetery. In 1796, Peter started a tannery business in the hamlet of Hammertown, where we made our home. Tanneries were an integral part of American life in those days, as leather was used for almost everything, and Dutchess County led the state in tannin production. One part of the tanning process requires the removal of the hair from the animal hides, and we found that the sediment from Buttermilk Pond near my family's old farm proved to be an excellent depilatory. However, tanning production is a heavy polluter of our waterways, although we didn't think about that then. And the pretty mist that would often settle over the Hammertown Valley was in fact the foul-smelling smoke from our factory. Peter and I had 9 children, 5 boys and 4 girls. My husband was a patron of the local district school, and together we instilled in our children the importance of a good education. One year, our children attended 200 more days than any other family in the district, setting a record. Years later, our granddaughter, Sarah Allerton, started a select school in Pine Plains. Unfortunately, the Husteds are predisposed to a frail constitution, and I have outlived most of our children. Our son Cornelius took over the tannery business in 1808 after Peter died. Cornelius was also one of the first directors of the Pine Plains Bank. Well, I understand my portrait is done. Shall we see how it came out? Ah, not a good likeness.
Next, we meet Harry Jackson, the son of Pine Plains jeweler J. Jackson, who continued and expanded his father's business. By promoting local tourism, Harry Jackson unofficially became Pine Plains' first travel agent.
Hello there. My name is Harry Jackson. I was born right here in Pine Plains in 1882, and I couldn't have picked a better place or time to live if I had chosen it myself. That was the heyday of the railroads, and there were 18 trains on 3 railroads going in and out of town daily. Pine Plains had everything you could ask for. Celebrated school, Seymour Smith Institute, a roller skating rink, one of the first in the county, an opera house, a racetrack, thriving businesses. All this, and it still had that small-town charm. Not only that, with its lakes and streams, it was a sportsman's paradise. In the summer, the boarding houses were full of tourists from New York City. I used to advertise my services in the city paper. Just $2 a day got you the perfect vacation, with a boat, canoe, automobile, and a bungalow right in the lake included. My specialty was the moonlit cruise. I only had an 8th grade education, but that was common in those days. I didn't need more schooling because I was going to be taking over the family business. I started out apprenticing in my father's shop, where the old Peck's grocery store was later located. I was fortunate because when my father apprenticed at 16, he had to go live with a jeweler down in Fishkill. When I was 20, I opened up my own shop across the street from my father's, in the building next to the town park. You call it the old library today, but when I bought the building in 1902, it was known as the old post office. For a while, there was even a pool hall for the Ketterer Hotel next door. And DeWitt Ketterer, the proprietor, even built a passageway connecting it to his hotel for his guests. In the beginning, my father and I split the family business. While he continued the jeweler portion and the clock and watch repair, I continued most of the retail, selling fishing supplies, sporting goods, and firearms. I offered a one-day photo service, and I even got an optician's license so I could prescribe glasses. I sold everything, from Victrola phonographs to bicycles, and you could always find a group of youngsters hanging around my busy little shop. After my father died, in 1919, I took over the entire business. It was clear I needed more space, so I added an addition to the south side of my building. With my parents now both gone, as I had been living with them, having never married, I raised the roof and built an apartment upstairs, which I immediately moved into. Thereafter, and for many years, my building became known as the Harry Jackson Building, for which it was known for many years. I was very proud of that. You know, I loved photography, and perhaps my most lasting contribution to the town were all the photographs I took of local scenes, many of which were made into postcards. Penny postcards were all the rage, especially mine, of course. In fact, the years 1907 to 1915 were known as the golden age of the postcard. They were popular with tourists, but also an economical way for people in rural communities like Pine Plains to keep in contact with the outside world. They became collectibles, and still are to this day. In fact, you can even find some of my old postcards for sale on this newfangled internet website called eBay. In my later years, I served as the Pine Plains director of the Dutchess County Sportsmen's Association. After I read Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, which warned about the dangers of the terrible pesticide DDT, I wrote a letter to the New York State Conservation Department about their use of DDT to control gypsy moths due to my concern about its harmful effects on the fish population. Their response downplayed the dangers, assuring me that, quote, "Since the introduction of chemical insecticides at the end of World War II, we have treated many hundreds of acres of forest lands and to date have not had an authenticated case of fish kill." Well, of course, we now know just how harmful DDT was to the environment. Fortunately, it was finally banned in 1972, just after my death. Looking back, I guess you could say I was something of a loner. But everyone in town knew me, and I was well liked. Well, maybe not by some of the younger set. You see, I cannot abide misbehaving children. When I wasn't catching the little miscreants stealing from my shop when they thought I wasn't looking, I had my hands full keeping them in line during my years as an usher at the Pine Plains Theater. For my last hurrah, in 1951, I published a post in the local paper saying goodbye to the community as I was moving to Florida for the winter. I had been vacationing in Florida for many years, and now I needed to move there due to my health. Sinus troubles. And so, I became what you might call a snowbird, dividing my time between Pine Plains in the summer and the Florida Keys in the winter. While I was in the Keys, I even worked as a charter boat captain, which of course, I enjoyed very much. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Put in a good word to your friends about Pine Plains for me, won't you?
As we continue our journey, we meet Sarah McClellan, who immigrated from Ireland as a single woman, but didn't stay single for long. She ultimately worked as a maid for the grandson of Paulie Husted in the same house where Paulie lived.
I am Sarah Rutledge McClellan, and as you can tell by my accent, I was not born in this country. You've probably heard of the Irish potato famine that began in 1845. Well, in Ireland, we called it the Great Hunger. Yeah, the English colonisation of Ireland had a lot to do with how this came about. The English took our best land for themselves to raise cattle for their beef markets back home. The potato was a staple of the poor Irish farmers' diet long before the famine came. We grew an inferior variety called the Irish lumper, which could grow in the worst soil conditions so that a 1 acre plot could support an entire family. Unfortunately, this potato suffered from a blight, which caused Ireland's potato crop to fail for 7 straight years. And while potatoes rotted in the fields, about 1 million Irish men, women and children perished from starvation and disease. I was just a child at the time, and I remember always being hungry. Well, the British government's response to this crisis was inadequate. Only half of the promised soup kitchens ever materialised. Luckily, our family was able to avoid the workhouse because my father found work digging ditches and building roads as part of a public works labour force. Over the next 10 years, more than 2 million Irish people left Ireland, about 60% of them going to America. We also had donations in the form of food and charity and clothing. Although I did not leave Ireland until long after the famine was over, my decision to leave was as a direct result of it. I wanted to find a husband. You see, the famine affected every aspect of Irish society. Young people put off getting married until they were older and could afford it, if they were lucky enough to find someone. Factory jobs dried up, and a source of independent income for single women went with it also, and the status it came with. The famine turned second-class citizens of women like myself. The only choice I had, if I didn't want to end up a spinster living off the charity of relatives, was to emigrate. And that is exactly what I did, leaving for America in 1864 at the age of 28 with all my worldly possessions, such as they were. Oh, the trip to America was long and unpleasant, and by no means cheap, even for those in steerage. First, we took a steamer to Liverpool, England, then boarded a shipping vessel, and after 6 long weeks across the Atlantic, finally arrived in New York. First, We disembarked in New York Harbour, and boarding officials came on to take the passenger list. I got off with my luggage, and we were ferried across the harbour to Castle Garden, the immigration landing depot. As our barge approached the tip of Manhattan, Castle Garden's large circular building loomed before us. Considering its name, I expected there to be spectacular gardens, but there was not one to be seen. As we were ushered into the rotunda and waited to be registered, I glanced at the weary faces around me, of all the people still dressed in their native costumes, and the incessant babble of scores of different languages echoed around the great hall. First, I had a brief medical examination, and then the foreign exchange brokers, I exchanged my Irish pounds for American dollars. I paid a clerk to write my family back home, letting them know of my safe arrival. The garden even provided lodging at a local boarding house. There was no shortage of police, whose job it was to keep unscrupulous characters outside who were waiting for unsuspecting immigrants to emerge. The garden also provided a labour exchange, and it was open to anyone and no shortage of jobs. I expected to find a domestic servant position. However, they were all looking for references, and I had none. I walked away, not knowing what to do. Just then, a gentleman approached and asked if he could help. He introduced himself as Robert McClellan, a Scotsman, and a fine-looking man he was too. I explained my predicament, and he said there was work in a factory up north. His employer was looking for an Irish girl to work in his household. Would I be interested? Well, I didn't know if I should trust him, but after talking some more, I decided that he was honest and to go with them. And that is how I ended up here in Pine Plains, working for the Husted family, because Robert worked in their tannery. Robert and I were married, and within a year, welcomed our daughter, Violet. Robert later confessed to me he had had an ulterior motive in going to Castle Garden that day. He had been looking for a wife. I confessed to him I had come to America to find a husband. I guess you could say we both found what we were looking for that day at Castle Garden.
Up and down, Evergreen and black and brown, past the shields through the town, all for sake of Sarah. Step together on we go, here for heel and toe for toe, arm in arm and row on row, all for Sarah. Red her cheeks as rowan flower, brighter eyes as any star, fairest of them all by far is our darling Sarah. Step together on we go, here for heel and toe for toe, arm in arm and row on row, off the Sarah's way. Oh, plenty herring, plenty meal, plenty peat to fill her creel, plenty bonny barns as well, that's our taste for Sarah. Step together on we go, here for heel and toe for toe, arm in arm and row on row, off the Sarah's way. Step gaily on we go, here for heel and toe for toe,
Now we end our journey through Pine Plains history with a Pine Plains resident who advocated for women to have a say in governing our country. She also helped manage the beautiful establishment we know as the Pines today.
I am Rachel Rudino. My name may be familiar to you if you've heard of Rudd Pond, named after my family, and you may remember my husband, Frank Eno, a featured character last year, and my youngest daughter, also named Rachel Eno, who spoke from the porch of the Pines the year before, in 2018. I am here to honor the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. I was a serious and active suffragette. The local headquarters for the suffragettes here in Pine Plains, and there were a number of us, was torn down in 1937. But here is a photo of the building. My husband, Frank, a lawyer, a farmer, postmaster, and president of Seymour Smith Academy, was very active in the community, but so was I. We had 5 children together, which kept me busy for many years, but I eventually found time to become involved in the women's rights movement. In 1915, I was a delegate from Pine Plains to the suffrage convention of Dutchess and Putnam counties at the Nelson House in Poughkeepsie. I was elected leader of the 1st Assembly District, and I was a secretary for the Dutchess County chapter of the WCTU, the Women's Christian Temperance Union. While I did not favor the complete prohibition of liquor, I always believed in moderation. I'm sure we've all seen things get out of hand a time or two due to too much alcohol. You see, I managed the Pines for 10 years as a tourist home, and I saw quite a bit of drinking and its effects. Unfortunately, the Pines had to be sold in 1905 because of my brother-in-law Stuart's investment scandal. In my opinion, he would have been much better off had he lain off the alcohol. Of course, once I was no longer managing the Pines, I had more time to work for women's rights. By then, my children were grown and on their own. We always emphasized education to them. My youngest, Rachel, my namesake, went to Syracuse University and attended secretarial school in New York City. I never overcame the sense of loss at her passing out of this life at the tender age of 28. She was young and strong, but the Spanish flu vanquished her, just like the pandemic of today has brought down so many. Like me, Rachel enjoyed her work and her independence, and she looked forward to casting her ballot. But she died in 1918, 2 years before women finally won the right to vote. So please, in memory of her, and to honor my efforts, and most importantly for yourselves, exercise your rights and remember to vote.
This concludes our visit with our friends from the past and our tour of Evergreen Cemetery. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed learning about Pine Plains history. Be well and stay safe. Until we meet again.